And would you like me to share my screen, Damon?
No, I got it. Hello and welcome to another Lean Focus webinar. I'm going to be your moderator, Damon Baker. I'm the CEO of Lean Focus. And in a few short moments, I'm going to introduce you to today's panelist, George Ellis, who is the Senior Vice President of the Lean Focus Innovation Practice. So today's topic for discussion is called From Confusion to Clarity, Mastering Innovation with the Four Pillars of Lean Transformation. Quite a mouthful, but I promise you by the end of it, it will all make sense. We ask that you please only use this webinar for its express purposes, and that if you'd like to use this content in any other way, you send us a note to info@leanfocus.com. A few logistics that we'll cover today. All of the participants who are listening today will be placed in listen-only mode. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to have a Q&A session that I will moderate. You'll notice at the bottom of the Zoom webinar control panel, there is a Q&A or questions and answers option that you can type in your question. I'm going to be moderating those and reading those and dealing with those on a first in, first out basis at the end of the webinar. And we should have plenty of time to get to your questions. If you are unable to participate in the entirety today, or perhaps you're not here live, don't fret. There's actually going to be a recording that will be sent to you one day after the webinar concludes. And if you do not receive that, you may want to check your spam folder. Another way you can always see our webinars is if you go to our Lean Focus website, leanfocus.com, and you click over to the Thought Leadership tab. And you see the extension here, leanfocus.com, Thought Leadership. You scroll down, you can see all of the webinars, including this one, that we have carried out in the past. And in addition, we have a YouTube channel, Lean Focus LLC, where you can watch all these webinars. And there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood about 75 different webinars. So lots of good content there for you to look over. A few short comments on Lean Focus, our firm. So at the top, we believe in building high performance cultures for our clients. And we believe that a high performance culture is like a three-legged stool, where the first leg of the stool is driven leaders. So folks within the organization who have the mindset, the experience, and model the right lean behaviors to lead the organization forward for their lean transformation. The second leg of the stool is guiding principles. So as part of our business system, we have a set of 14 guiding lean principles that really help to ensure that everyone is making the right decisions around continuous improvement within the organization. One of those guiding principles, for example, is Kaizen mindset, the idea that we can always make our work better each and every day. The last leg of the stool is proven systems, and much of the topic we'll talk about today is an example of one of those proven systems. So proven systems are a collection of structured processes and tools which enable the organization to actually continually improve year after year to drive those sustainable results. So think of it as a toolbox, and a toolbox that covers all the functions within a business, all aspects of a P&L in order to drive value creation. When we partner with our clients, we're typically working in a combination of practice areas, and the topic for today's conversation is actually going to be squarely within our innovation practice, which George leads. But we also have other practices that we bring to bear with our clients when we're working together to drive a lean transformation. So starting at the top is our growth practice. So think of this as lean principles applied to the functions of sales and marketing with the goal to achieve organic or inorganic growth. Moving counterclockwise over to operations. This is how most lean manufacturing is thought about. It's traditional application of lean principles to the four walls of a factory, improving such things as safety, quality, delivery, and cost. Supply chain practice is beyond the four walls of a factory. How do we improve our procurement function? How do we improve our logistics and freight? Reduce supplier risk? All these topics are covered within that practice. The innovation practice we'll talk about here in a bit, but essentially everything to the left of the growth practice, sales and marketing, it's how do I launch products faster, on time, on budget, on spec. Doing that in the most waste-free possible using lean principled tools applied to innovation practices. The leadership practice is all about the people processes within a business that are necessary to enable a lean transformation. So an example of some of these would be the talent management system, the performance management system, succession planning, mission, vision, values, all the wiring, if you will, that kind of pulls the people processes together within a business. Focus Solutions is our toolbox, which comprise the training materials that we use with our clients, but then also the software packages that we bring for our lean engagement as well to help carry out processes like strategy deployment or daily management or Kaizen event planning. We have applications for those. Talent Solutions is all about retained executive search and interim leadership. So many times we find ourselves in a situation that the organization is lacking the structure it needs to drive continuous improvement. So we have to help that client build that team, and we vet and source those top lean talent and bring them into the organization so that they can accelerate the rate of change. And lastly is our private equity practice, which focuses on the vertical of private equity. And this is pretty much the full cycle of M&A, everything from due diligence, post-acquisition integration, value creation, all the way leading up to exit of the asset in the private equity world, and perhaps even doing some value creation at the end to realize a higher multiple for that business that they're selling. And we do this in all types of industries and all types of clients. So over 8 years, we've worked with roughly 600 clients, ranging in size from Fortune 10 companies all the way down to venture capital, pre-revenue types of businesses, startups, and everything in between. Privately held, publicly traded, manufacturing businesses, service businesses, software businesses, logistics businesses. What I like about this slide is it really underscores the idea that lean applies in each and every situation, that you can always eliminate waste regardless of the industry or the type of business that you have. And I mentioned earlier our business system, and we're going to go pretty deep into at least the innovation piece of our system, but you can see at the high level the 5 sections of our business system laid out here in a grid. The innovation and growth system is all about how do you drive above market organic growth using tools around new product development, sales and marketing. In the middle, as I alluded to earlier, is our supply chain and operations system, which is improving safety, quality, delivery, and cost in the 4 walls of our factory and in our extended supply chain. The leadership system we talked about earlier is around the people processes, and we've broken that up by the business, the culture, and the talent within the organization. And then in the middle is something we refer to as foundational tools. So we think of these as 10 function agnostic tools, meaning regardless of if you work in sales or marketing, operations, finance, customer service, there's an application and a use for these tools to improve your work within the function that you occupy. So if you were to start anywhere, we would say that probably 80 to perhaps 90% of the challenges that you could ever face in an organization could be managed and improved with these 10 simple tools. And then lastly, the foundation, which I talked as one of the legs of the stool, is the guiding principles. There's 14 of them. I gave you one example of Kaizen mindset, but there's 13 others. And you can think of these almost like values or principles that an organization might have, core values an organization might have in their organization. But these are more related to the values of the lean transformation that you're trying to embark on successfully. So that's a little bit about lean focus. Thank you for taking some time with me to explore that. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's guest speaker, George Ellis. I will tell you he's having a little bit of camera challenges, so this will be the one time you get to see what George looks like in this webinar. So imagine this is what George looks like. So George, take it away.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Damon. Yeah, don't worry, you guys aren't missing a lot. I wanted to. I always like to start to talk about like what really got me interested in lean thinking, because we're going to talk today about some applications of lean thinking to innovation. And the first thing I usually find is that people think, well, like Damon said, lean is for the factory. That's where it really made itself famous. But I very rarely work in the factory. I work almost all my time is spent with product development and product management, and that all the way from, coming up with the ideas and that you want to make a product all the way out to getting them to sell and having them be successful. And what I've seen is that lean applies so much more than a lot of people think. A lot of folks think that lean means that there's going to be a checklist of things I have to do, and there's going to be this process that's going to take away my creativity. Hey, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, I'm a software developer, I'm an expert. I don't need those kinds of things. And lean makes no attempt to do anything like that. The fact is that the best lean thinking organizations, what they do is they get the waste out of your way so you can spend more time doing that stuff. And I like to use as my favorite example is like if you have this really wasteful process of how to hire a new person or how to apply for a capital request, and you're having to go to meeting after meeting or submit multiple requests, or it's making your projects late. There's nothing fun about that. There's nothing creative. It's just miserable. And so what we seek to do is get rid of those wasteful things in an organization so that our amazing scientists, developers, product marketers can go do the things they're amazing at. And so I like to use one example where I worked with a group where we did a lean transformation. I was with a very lean company at the time. And one of the leaders, I was with Danaher, and I joined an organization we had just bought 2 years before. And after 2 years, the company decided they wanted to do a lean transformation of their R&D group. And when it started, we weren't able to deliver projects on time. We were the team was we never not getting anywhere near the revenue that was promised at the beginning of the project. I had an 8%. When I joined, there was an 8%. I think we had something like 8% retention problem. So people, in an R&D group, that's pretty high, and so a lot of people unhappy. Engagement scores were low. We did the lean transformation, and 3 years later, it was completely transformative. We were hitting 85% of our projects on time, which is really actually, I'll be glad to talk about why 100% is not the right number. It makes people a little bit too conservative, but 85 is really good. We were actually hitting a little bit above our revenue promises, and better than than most of the companies where we were. But we won an innovation award during that time. So for people who tell me, oh, lean takes away my ability to innovate, it's just the opposite. It enabled this team, and we wound up winning one of the most sought after innovation awards in the company one year, in the third year of that transformation. But what I'm most proud of is the people and how it changed them. We went from like something like 8% to I think we lost 2% in the third year. So people were staying. Our engagement scores rocketed as much as I've ever seen them go up. And so it's like lean does the opposite of what a lot of people think it does. It makes people more engaged, more innovative, and just constantly improving. And that's what we're really going to talk about. A lot of the things about how to get that in this meeting, but that's what caused me to fall in love with lean innovation. I joined the Danaher Business Systems office for a couple of years. And then when I had an opportunity to go broader with Damon, well, Damon didn't have to ask me twice. So that's how I found myself here. So a little bit, I wanted to tell you that story because process is interesting. Changing people's behavior and success is fascinating. And so that's what we're really here to do. And so here's the outline for our day. We're going to talk about what is the lean innovation practice. Damon showed you a diagram a few minutes ago that had quite a few words on it because he was showing the entire company. We're going to focus on just the innovation part and give a little bit simpler picture for just innovation. And then why lean in innovation? You've already heard me start, but we'll talk in more detail. How do we transform innovation? What is that path you get on? Because it's not like, oh, let's go have a Kaizen, now we're done. It's a lifelong journey of learning and improving and always getting better. And then what are the four pillars of lean transformation? So we're going to break down how you actually create transformation and then how continuous improvement powers innovation, and then we'll end with how we can help if you'd like to go further in this direction. And so this is the lean. This is the lean. This is the total lean innovation system within Lean Focus. I'm not going to read every one of these boxes to you, but what I want you to see is a couple things. First, you'll notice that the left side's blue and the right side's green. Why? Because the mindset on the left side is totally different in lean when you're trying to bring new ideas out, incubate them, and move them into a roadmap. It's a completely different approach. On the right hand side, that's execution. The left hand side, you're not spending a huge amount of money. Normally, when you're doing those things, it's really not I mean, the lion's share of any innovation team is spent in the green part. Probably 80% of what's spent in your R&D and product management is on the right side, actually getting things done. You're not spending a huge amount of money on the left side. On the right side, you are. So on the right side, you better be successful most of the time. I mean, you really don't want to be the person to come in with a $2 million project that completely failed because we missed a piece and we didn't understand. Like, failure is really not, it's really not acceptable except at the most infrequent time periods on the right-hand side. So let's say 98, 95% success rate is successful on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, 98% success of driving an idea through that process is absolute failure. Because what it means is you are not casting a broad net at all. On the left-hand side, you want to see 20% success rate. I want to know that for every idea I have, I evaluated 4 more. And so I know that my team is looking far and wide and really really looking at all spaces that are available for ideas. And the other thing I want to draw your attention to is we'll talk about something from time to time called the idea funnel. You see it there in the center on the left. That's everything that we could do. And up above it is all the sources we have to feed that funnel. The roadmap, which you see below that, looks like a roadmap. You see a well-known roadmap icon. That's everything we mean to do. So that's like what we mean to do over the next 3 years. So first off, funnel, what we could do, roadmap, resource rationalize what we have the people to do, laid out in calendar form, supporting our strategy, and so on. But if I follow to the right, I move into the pipeline. That's what I am doing. So anyway, you'll see that transition from the idea funnel to the roadmap to the pipeline. And today we're going to spend most of our examples on the right-hand side in the middle of that pipeline where most companies get hung up. But the principles we talk about today, they will apply to all parts of lean innovation, even though our examples are mostly drawn from projects that are in flight. So, and one last thing I'll mention is you'll see that one of the things you'll probably notice in this diagram is you don't see the word VOC. Most processes like this, somebody would say VOC, or you might, if you don't know the term, it means voice of customer. It means I'm interacting with the customer. Why don't you see VOC here? Why? Because VOC is there's so much in here. It takes up so much space. And Damon, maybe you could, if your mouse works, you could point, but VOC starts at segmentation in the upper left, where you see in the blue area. It continues into user workflow discovery in that center column, where we really understand what the customer does and what their real problems are, to design thinking, to finding solutions that customers identify with. You'll see continuous user feedback through there, where we're actually partnering with a handful of customers as we develop the product versus ask a few questions at the beginning and deliver a beta unit at the end, which is the normal. And then over to the right, you see launch control room. So all of those areas, they're all VOC. VOC is such an overused and sometimes misused term. We don't use it a lot, but we are constantly talking to the customer through this process. So thanks, Damon. And so why do we want lean in innovation? And so what I want to do is show you a cycle. And we have to start someplace in the cycle. So on the first click, what you'll see is, hey, we bring in a bunch of lean processes and we're able to get our new products out on target, on time. So what does that cause? That causes us to get delighted customers because people are happy. They get the project that sales has been promising them. It actually works when they get it. The quality defects are minimal, and so on. What does that create? That creates value delivered to customers. And how do we measure value? What the customer is willing to pay is from Taiichi Ono. And so customers are willing to buy our things. They bring real value to them. And now what happens, this is my favorite part of what happens in this whole cycle, the next click, is you get this engaged team. It's like, oh, we just won. And that then creates this engaged team that's excited about what they're doing. Um, and I think there's a Teams window showing up. Is that? Oh, sorry, that's on mine. Do you mind going back up one slide? Excuse me, my screen goofed up. But you get this engaged team of like, without people that come in and say, we can do this. Let's go do another one. And then you're learning and you're getting better and you're installing standard processes, and then even more complex projects are on time and customers are more delighted and the team gets more engaged. I told you in the very beginning slide that I watched our engagement scores go up. They rocketed. Like, I don't think there was any other part of the company that was doing, I never saw any part of the company was doing close to that well in terms of the lift that we got out of lean being applied to our innovation team. And, people they'll talk a lot about engagement, like let's have parties and, team building events where we go throw hatchets or have an ice cream social. That's all great stuff. I'm all for it. But nothing engages a team like people feeling like they're successful, like they're practicing their craft and they're expert in it, like they're growing in their careers. That's what engages people so much. And it just creates this cycle of virtue. Now, on the next slide, what happens when we don't have lean? Well, you wind up with a very similar cycle, but it goes just the opposite way. That projects are short. We have a confused team that doesn't work together well. Communication's not good. Customers are disappointed because things are late or half-baked. And then we wind up not getting the revenue we thought. And then the team is constantly hearing about how that project failed because it was late and customers don't want it. And we have all these shortfalls. And why doesn't our R&D team, develop things, and our product management team specify things that people love? And this cycle just goes on and on to where people just get used to losing. And I'm going to give you one example. When I first started in project management in I want to say it was about 2003, 2004, they teamed me up with an experienced project manager. And I was pretty excited. My first day I went in and I said, I really want to know your secret. How do you keep projects on time? Because I don't understand it. And he's just like, slow your roll. He's like, George, I've been doing this 10 years. I've never had one project come in on time. Now, what do you think that guy's like? Every day he goes home, every day his team goes home, they go home losing the game. And that's how it feels. And so this cycle is this wasteful cycle that just goes on and on. People get used to losing. Then the sales department is like, well, the last 3 launches we did weren't very good. I'm not even going to tell customers about these because I've had so many bad experiences. Then when you do a launch, it takes a long time to get a foothold because then so it just goes on and on. And this cycle also can go downward. And you've got to make a choice. Do you want this cycle to go up and up and become virtuous, or do you want to use lean principles? I mean, do you want to use lean principles to make that happen, or do you just keep pushing and trying harder? And so that's what the next slide talks about. What happens when we get caught in this cycle is, what happens is people, the boss comes in, you guys know what I'm talking about. And if you're the boss, I've done it. I don't mean to be giving you a particular hard time. The natural thing is go tell the team they need to do better. Why aren't you trying harder? Why are people putting in more effort? We need the hours. What's wrong with folks? We need, and they're like, they come and they push, right? They push from like, I want to see more effort. And then, and there's a fleeting value from it. So when the boss, when you have this project and you're getting a lot of attention from upper management, you will put in the extra hours, you'll do that work. It's not fun. And you get some value. The project pushes, but look at what happens to waste. You're just trying to push more through a wasteful system. And so it doesn't last. Eventually, it might be a month, it might be 3 months, but the focus of the organization turns elsewhere and things just return back to where they were. And for those of you that have been in R&D, this is not theoretical. This is every organization I've been to, this is what happens when you rely on push to make things better, to get out of that wasteful cycle I was describing earlier. Now, so I think we'll go on to the next slide. And so how do we transform innovation? And how do we create this virtuous cycle from where we have the wasteful cycle? And so the way we are here is we don't start by pushing our engineers to work harder. You notice there's no bump there. There's nobody coming and saying, you need to put in more effort. You got to do more hours. No, what we start with, and on that first click, what you'll see is we start by driving waste down. So we take our systems and take the waste down. And what happens is with the same amount of effort, the same amount of hours, we start getting more value and things start getting better. And then people get engaged. And when people get engaged, there's this secondary effect that they start like really liking work. You know, I'm winning this game. This is good. I can remember people, more smiles on people's faces. I remember more people working later. I remember, when people get into a lean transformation, it's not that they're being made to stay later, but they're really fascinated by things. Or maybe they spend their weekends learning about new areas of technology they can apply. Or maybe they're just more focused at work rather than complaining or going and visiting friends. They're putting more focus on what they're doing. But what you see happen is you get more teamwork, more focus, and you get with all that comes with more engagement. And so this is what creates that virtuous cycle. And you guys see the waste just keeps going down further and further. The value keeps going up. It's a virtuous cycle. It never ends. So I want to talk for a moment about what is the Deming cycle, or you might know it as the Shewhart cycle. But this is basically, think of this as the scientific method, but really applied at a very practical level. I plan something, that might be my hypothesis. I go do it, which means like I run the experiment, I check the results, and then I adjust when my results don't pay off the way I think they should. And then my adjustment is I change how I plan. And if you think about it, like I said, this is the scientific method. So lean thinking is at its very heart. It is the application of the scientific method to what we do in business, and in this case, to innovation. So, and so the plan, do, check, act cycle creates this virtuous cycle that you see in the middle. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about some practical examples of how we do that. So what are the 4 pillars to do that plan, do, check, act? And we'll go through each of these one by one. They're listed there at the bottom, but Damon, I think we can just pick them up in the slide as they appear. So so let's start with do. That's a little bit odd to start with do. You might think we start with plan, but in fact, when we come to organizations, the first thing we talk about is, how do I get my projects on time? Now, when I say projects on time, I don't mean that you hit the launch date. I mean you hit the launch date with the product fully complete. A half-done project launched on the original launch date is a late project. So project on time means it came out on time, it met our if I have to go back and redo a bunch of design parts because the quality was poor, that's also a late project. So I want to make sure that you guys understand, on time does not mean hitting a launch date. On time means hitting a launch date with a product that meets our standards and meets the original requirements. Now, so this is, we're doing the project, and most companies, well, it's very common, let me say, for companies to pull us in, because the most visible thing that you see when lean thinking is not being employed in an innovation group is you see late projects, and you see confused projects, and projects that stop and start, and maybe a fourth or a third of the projects at best are on time. But so that's where we start, because that's really a visible place. Everybody understands that. Now, when we go to check, what happens in check is we use formal problem solving. And what I mean by formal problem solving is you guys are, most people who are in innovation think of problem solving as my professor in college gave me a question, and now during a test, I have to solve that problem. It's a very one person in a silo doing the best to solve a closed problem that hopefully they understand completely because it's so well defined at the beginning they can solve it. Okay. Please disabuse yourself of that misunderstanding of what problem solving is in industry. It is nothing like that. In problem solving in industry, first off, we do it as a team, because no one person understands the problem as well as the whole team. And then we meet as a team and we drive consensus, and we make sure we get a multitude of views, and we get very mathematical. We take apart and we look at data rather than going on gut and going the direction our gut takes us. So problem solving and formal problem solving, sad to say, is confused a lot because of our university background. And but in real problem solving, we really solve problems. And then we drive to find out if that solution worked. Because when we walk out of a 2-day or a 3-day problem solving session, we have a hypothesis of what the solution is. Now we're going to go track it for 2 or 3 months and see if we really solved it. And now when we move to adjust, what we should see happening is we should be tracking the performance of our R&D group. What's our quality look like from R&D? How many quality defects do new products cause? What's our on-time delivery of our projects? What are other things? How are we? What's our customer? Customer feedback. All of those things are areas that we can track in what's called a bowling chart. You can see this looks a little bit like a bowling score sheet. And so it's called a bowler or a bowling chart. And so what we're doing is we expect to see those metrics drive up. And when we go to the last step, where do we put the knowledge of what we learned? We put it in our phase gate system, in our standard work. And, I see this so rarely in companies. Most companies think a problem solve is get together and have a meeting, get the project back on track. All of that's lost. Well, people will say like, now the organization knows. No, they don't. The organization has not learned until the standard work has changed. Otherwise, a few people know it, but the next group is going to make the same mistakes. And so what we want to do is create, in this example, as I told you, this is one focused on executing projects on time. You could apply this to any of those areas in that innovation workflow that I showed you earlier, but we're going to focus on this one for the moment. But the point is, I'll do a project, I'll go do problem solving and see where are we having problems in our projects. I'll look and make sure that we're actually driving our metrics up. I'll take that learning, I'll put it in my phase gate system, which I'm updating constantly. And when I plan my next project, it'll be a little bit better. And so you can see from this, this is where you're going to create that cycle of virtue, because you're going to be getting better and better every 6 months, every year. I like to say that in 2 or 3 years, you're not even going to recognize where you were. Or as I used to like to say, you're going to laugh about where we were. We thought we were pretty good. Now look at us 3 years later. It's night and day. And so where do the 4 pillars fit in this example? And so if you would, Damon, give us a first click, and what you'll see is visual project manager is how we can improve visual project management. And then the second click is it's in problem solving, which is, Damon talked earlier about foundational events. Foundational workflows. They're not really peculiar to innovation, because that problem solving story I told you applies everywhere in the company, from the factory floor to the C-suite. But that's a tool that we almost always have to teach when we do our innovation transformations. Now, the third click, we'll talk about how do we manage to track, to check how we're doing. And so most companies have some sort, we call it PPM, or product portfolio management review, but we're doing some sort of a meeting every month where we're looking at how we're performing. Typically, most companies, it's monthly. Sometimes it's a little more informal. And then where do we put our results? In the last click, you'll see that our results get stored in the lean phase gate system. And so these are the 4 pillars of lean innovation as applied to the areas of project management. Now, if we move it over to the left column and discover, or the right column and deploy, a few things would change, but not much. Once you get this model of transformation in your mind, it can be applied anywhere throughout innovation. And in fact, the same model applies everywhere, but this one obviously is focused on innovation deployment. Thanks, Damon. And so let's talk about how continuous improvement powers innovation. So when we think about starting a transformation journey, we think about we draw this like a subway system. And we draw it that way for a reason, because there's no one way that's right. Every organization is different. But the first thing we start with is a 30-minute checkup. And we just meet with you for 30 minutes. And we'll talk about that here in a slide a little bit later, about some of the details about that. But we go from there, we move to assessment of the company to get a situational understanding. Every company is different. And so there's no one plan that is right for every company. So we look at each company. Some companies, it's really the need to get projects on time. Some companies, it's the product funnel is running dry and we're coming up with a bunch of dull products that our customers don't care for. Some companies, it's about the organization and getting and helping with leadership. And so every company is different. And the first thing we want to do is get a situational understanding. And so, like the example I gave you, when I was talking to you about where I was with that group for 3 years. I mean, it was months before we were taking. It was a month, no, not months, maybe 2 months before we really started taking significant action. There was a period of just study. We did a few things, but mostly we were studying and getting a situational understanding. If you're from the factory floor, you'll recognize this as doing a VSM of an entire of an organization or entire factory. This is where you get that situational understanding, so I know where is the next place to work. Now, for most people, in the next click, what you'll see is for most people, it's getting projects on time. And so the idea is that normally the first event that we do is we come in and do a visual project management event, get people away from confused project management types. For example, how does Agile, what if one team is working in Agile and one team is working in Gantt charts? And if you keep up with LinkedIn, with my LinkedIn weekly publication called the Lean Innovation Journey, I actually talked about that very thing. Like, how do we bring together Agile, Gantt charts, action plans, planning boards? How do we bring all that together in a project that stays on time? Well, the answer is visual project management. We move that team then to daily management, which means daily, especially for important projects. I mean, some projects it's weekly, but normally daily to 3 times a week. And we meet for 20 minutes. How are we doing? Like a huddle between plays in a football game. You come in very quick. It's a 10 to 15-minute meeting. How are we doing it? Those of you that are familiar with Agile Scrum, it's modeled after that. And then we do daily management and we see where things are going well. And from there, and where they're not, and we get data out of that daily management, which lets us drive really data-driven problem solving. So, so for example, where am I having days delay in my daily management? We track days of delay and where they're coming from. In problem solving, I build a Pareto of where they're coming from and really deeply solve problems and make sure that that I don't just put in Band-Aids or gut reaction, but we really drive it through data-driven methods. We really get better at project management. Now, from there, we start thinking about how do we bring in at the portfolio? How are we having meetings where we're looking at the entire portfolio? Typically, that's the next thing that follows. As I say, everybody's different, and that's why the train track lets you can turn off and go down this line, or you can keep going depending on where your organization is. I love the subway model because there might be 100,000 people using a subway system. There's probably just a handful that are going from exactly the same place to exactly the same place at exactly the same time. So it's a very flexible way that's adapted to every organization. But we start by aligning innovation to strategy, developing these core KPIs that form that bowler, being able to bring in structured resource planning to get the confusion out of resources, and wind up driving monthly portfolio reviews that are very structured and tie in together. They tie the knot between our strategy and our projects. Now, from there, we go to the whole level of product development excellence, which is now we get to work, typically, the next thing we do is get to work on our phase gate system. And I've written a lot on smart phase gate. I can't talk about it right now because it's a lengthy process, but I mean, it's a lengthy thing to talk about. It actually deserves an hour all on its own, and there probably will be one here soon. But smart phase gate is a way to bring antiquated phase gate systems, which have great content, but they're formatted in a terrible way, on a giant Word document, and bring them in so they really flow smoothly. And so this is how you achieve product development excellence. So you see the flow, how we're moving, we're getting into that virtuous cycle. We're getting better and better. Now from here, there are more choices. We can go deep on this and really get the most outstanding phase gate system, or Damon, on the next click, you'll see we can focus really on getting commercial excellence. A lot of companies want to move quickly to commercial excellence. The R&D group is not focusing too bad. They're not doing badly, but we need to get the commercial team and aligned and get products that really launch. I used to have a boss that said our products don't launch, they escape. And so the idea is that we want to be able to get products that launch and they're very highly synchronized with the project so that we're ready to bring in customers as quickly as possible. We have other clients that really want to go down on that bottom blue path. Hey, I need to know about my funnel and get innovation going. And so these are like the choices that we have. And so you're able to, as we work with an organization, what we like to do is, look at where you are, plot out this map for you, and then come out and say, does this meet your needs? Does this resonate with you? And, and find that place of agreement of like, yeah, this is what we'd like to do the next year or two. And this is what makes sense to us. And so that's kind of one way of looking at bringing lean transformation. So I'll talk a couple of minutes, how we can help, and I'll focus a little bit on the 30-minute checkup on the next slide. And so, what is the 30-minute innovation checkup? And what it is we just have a 30-minute meeting. It's you talking, us listening. We set up the meeting and then listen to you. And it's really fun to have a head of R&D, product marketing, a general manager, maybe somebody from sales, a diverse group in the room for that 30 minutes. And it's interesting because we just sit back and listen for the most part while that group comes to consensus. I mean, that's really what's going on as people are hearing other people's views. And what we do then is we find your pain points. We create a proposal that's custom for you. And so you see on the left is a subway map. That's the map anybody can take. On the right, this is the map we think of what the stops are that we think together makes sense for your team to take. And you can see they're mixed, right? We're getting some leadership events and moving down to project events and going through teaching tools, and every one of these is completely different, and they're matched to what the organization, where they are and what their needs are. So, these are things. You give us 30 minutes, within 2 or 3 days, we come back to you with a customized proposal. The next slide will show you what the 30-minute checkup looks like. And what it looks like is basically we look at the 9 most common pain points of innovation, and they start all the way on the left to our innovation doesn't align to our strategic goals. Moving towards the middle, our pipeline moves too slowly. Moving toward the right, our phase gate system is really weak. We haven't touched it in 4 years. I hear that so often. And you can read through those others, but the point is there are these 9 pain points, and we just have a meeting and everybody gets a bucket full of frowny faces. And those 6 names at the bottom, those are people from your company. And we give you each 6 frowny faces, and you basically put your frowny faces where you feel the pain. And we are able to, in 30 minutes, drive it's just amazing to watch it happen each time. I'm always surprised how much we learn when we do one of these. So these are gratis. We do this to help you see where you are, and then they give us direction on how to provide a proposal for you. So on the next slide, you can see the details. If you'd like to do a 30-minute lean checkup, we just ask that you bring multiple groups. Don't do it with any single group because no one person has such a broad view that they really understand everything going on in the company. And it's a fast moving agenda. It's like 5 minutes. Hi, how are you? I'm George, quick introductions, and we pull up, really it's like the one slide, which is just the one with the buckets and the frowny face, and you just talk. And we go for 20 minutes, and you'll be amazed at how much you'll learn about your organization in that 20 minutes. And then typically in 2 days, we'll have a roadmap proposal for you, and then we can talk about that. And that's what we think is the best way to get started in this process. And what's going to happen? What can you expect? Well, in the transformation model, we look at 10 elements, and I know this is a bit of a long menu here on the left, but we look at I won't read them all, but we look at the people. How are you managing your innovation? How are you managing your portfolio? When I say innovation strategy, I mean coming up with new product ideas. How do you manage that funnel and so on? And these are the 8 areas that we look. So these are the dimensions that we look, and what you should be able to expect. You should expect that your new product portfolio revenue, it meets or exceeds your strategic target. So if you came in saying, I'm going to get, $1.5 million out of this product within 3 years of launch, you should get $1.5 million. You should get on-time project delivery near 100%. As I say, if you really pound your fist and demand 100%, you're going to get you're going to really drive a lot of conservatism in the group. This is from Don Reinertson from Penn. His advice is shoot for 85%. You should expect project revenue and I'm sorry. I got them out of order there. The first one I gave you is actually the third one, that you'll hit your revenue targets. But at the top, you should expect your portfolio revenue over the next 3 years to be aligned to your strategy. So excuse me, I think I did 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3 in that list. On the fourth one, you should expect innovative, collaborative new products that delight your customers. You should expect to see yourselves leading in areas. You should be seeing yourselves reaching in places you haven't, and you should see your teams change from less individual contributors and becoming more of a team. And one of my favorite things about lean thinking is how much I start to see people in a meeting say, I don't know how to do that. And I would say when in the beginning, the room is silent or the phone call is silent. Most of our daily management is by video. 6 months later, someone will volunteer. Hey, I can help you. I'm ahead on my stuff. Let me join in with you. You see this real teamwork. When somebody is having trouble, someone just comes over. They don't have to be told by the boss. They just know that the team needs to win. We have to win as a team, and that's the only way we win. Individual contribution doesn't mean much if we're not winning. And so that's one of my favorite things is the change in people. And you should expect your engagement scores to go up and your voluntary severance, people quitting, to go down. And I'll just comment here briefly. I don't think there's any source of waste and innovation that's larger than losing a good person because they weren't engaged at work. What is the cost of that? You have a senior engineer, a scientist, a developer that's been at your company for 5 to 10 years. They're subject matter experts. They're very good at what they do, and they're just frustrated. So they leave and go work for another company. Now you've got to go find somebody. 1 in 3 times that person's gonna be terrible at it. You're gonna start over, and the other 2 out of 3 times, you're still gonna spend years before that person catches up to the person you had. So voluntary severance, you could lose a person quitting your company because they're not engaged. You could lose the net impact on your company could be $500,000, $700,000. It's years to catch up when you lose key people. So you want to see engagement scores go up and go up rapidly. And it's to stop that worst form of waste that I think there is. And I hope you enjoyed this webinar. If you'd like to see more, like Damon said, we have like you said, about 75, and this webinar will be at this site within a day or so. And also, I'll mention I don't think we have it here on the list, but I also, if you will go on LinkedIn, and just look up George Ellis, you'll see I write weekly a little 5 to 8 minute read on lean innovation. We cover everything, phase gate to sales to VOC, everything in innovation. It's all, we try to cover the whole gamut. It's a short read, and I would love it if you would take a look at it, and would appreciate it if you'd like to subscribe. And I think I really like this quote from Drucker. So the greatest danger it's in times of turbulence is to act with yesterday's logic. And to me, when I look at companies and I come and I see, the example of that to me is I'll come to a company and see that they've got teams that aren't working well together. They're having weekly meetings. If they meet at all, the meetings are poorly attended. We don't actually have problem solving implemented. Our phase gate system is out of date. And to me, that's yesterday's logic. Just thinking that people are going to come in and somehow projects are going to come on time. It's not going to happen. You have to change. You have to change the way you behave. And what lean thinking is all about is it's not about check boxes and metrics. I know it can feel like that from the outside. It's about changing people's behavior. It's about acting with the logic that creates wins, that creates behavior that's different, because they're acting like a team. They're looking at data. and they're sustaining and measuring what they're doing, and they're holding themselves to higher standards, and they're constantly looking to improve. And so I think that Drucker's comment, I know it wasn't meant directly to be aligned with lean, but I think it's perfectly aligned to lean.
Okay, so just a reminder for those that may have had questions for George, you can enter your questions in the Q&A panel. And George, we have several questions here teed up and ready to go. Are you ready?
I think I am.
Okay, so this first one is a long one here. So Theodo, Theodo, is of course the poster child for lean tech, and Sandrine Olivencia's book, Build to Sell, is a wonderful example of applying a kind of lean process and product development to software. And another common example of a lean inspired model is Marty Kagan's Transformed at Silicon Valley product group. George, what do you think of these models, and what are your experiences in implementing your own and these models in software? It was a
So
mouthful.
yeah, so I haven't read the two books that you mentioned. So but I can certainly talk about lean in software, because I do think, and incidentally, like I said, I published a short article on this topic yesterday on LinkedIn. So if you know, there's a little bit more thorough answer there than I can give. The lean model for software is, we look at software as so what the first, in project management, we divide cross function and interfunction. And so our lean model in the our lean model in the software in function is very much aligned with the SAFe framework from Agile. So we think that the Agile approach is very lean at its foundation, and it works great with software, but we see that at the functional level. Now, very few projects are pure software. Maybe in IT it happens. Maybe a web dev company could happen. But even if the only development you're doing is software, you're still having to deal with multiple functions like marketing and product marketing and sales. And so there's still a cross-functional approach where Agile doesn't work well. You're working across functions. So our model is that VPM sits across the top, visual project management is interfunctional and really focuses on the handoffs. And that little article in LinkedIn explains our thinking there, I think, better than I can do here in just a moment. But that pulls together, the marketing team that wants to use an action plan. And maybe you have a hardware team because you're developing an instrument, and that team wants to use a Gantt chart. And so all of those, there are models for those different types of projects that are tuned to the needs of those projects. Software doesn't behave like hardware. Why would we manage the projects the same? But at the top, we've got to keep that whole project traveling together. Because, if the firmware team doesn't have what the hardware team needs to go to do a test, then the whole project is going to could be delayed by, if you're going to a UL test or something, it could be months before you can get another slot. So VPM to keep everybody synchronized. In function, use the method that works best to you. Don't worry about making all of those uniform. And so we think that's lean because, number one, we really respect the in-function expertise to pick the model that works well for them. We think it's a lean model because the VPM is the best model of how the project's going and the best visualization. So visual management is a huge part of lean. It's daily management is another lean principle that's in that model. The leaders of those different functions are meeting together every day for 15 minutes to make sure we're on track, just like a huddle at a football game. And so and then we're also measuring and calculating, doing that PDCA cycle, which I showed earlier. So those 5 things, I think, are the core part of how the lean model of software and how it plugs into a project.
All right, thank you. Next question. Do you teach techniques or methods to increase the iteration/experimentation at a low cost in the discover and design phases of the innovation process?
Absolutely, absolutely. So my favorite there is Eric Ries. He wrote that really seminal book back in, I want to say 2012. I'm looking at my signed copy on my bookshelf because he's kind of a little bit of a hero. But he talks about this idea, and what we do. I showed you continuous user feedback, and remember that slide that had the green and the blue boxes. One of the boxes was continuous user feedback. That's a structured approach to what Eric Ries teaches in his book of just constantly engaging the customer. So the first thing I look at when somebody shows me a visual project management map, we call it a swim lane map with all the functions on it, I want to see the customer as the top lane. And I want to understand, how are you interacting with the customer constantly through the project? And what do I usually get? You guys know what I get, because anybody in R&D knows what you get. I get a survey that somebody from product management asks at the beginning of the project. And if about 80% of the way through, I send a beta out. And about a month before launch, I get beta input back from the customer, which of course is way too late to do anything about it. So that's the first thing I see. And so what we do is we visualize that and we show them that. I was like, you are not interacting with the customer. And we want to fill that customer lane up with experiments. In the beginning, it's focus groups and, non-working prototypes that are maybe physically, if you're doing an instrument, maybe it's physically the right size, but it doesn't function. Websites, they're just wireframes. But we move bit by bit as we learn more and more. And it's a constant series and typically on a 6 to 8 week cycle, where we're constantly engaging the customer. Every R&D group I start with, they always say, oh, you can't do that. We can't send anything out until beta. And I start there every time. I've probably had this conversation 15 times. And you say to them, yeah, you can. Okay, why don't you just fly the customer into our building and let them use what you have? And oh my gosh, we did that. I remember one time where we brought 3 customers. We flew them from around the world, and we took months out of our development cycle. We wound up increasing revenue, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because we brought them in for 3 days. And by the way, the customer loved it because they got to contribute. So yeah, we definitely have those cycles. They're definitely built in, and they should be part of every project.
Okay, next question. Our small company is currently undergoing a lean transformation. We've encountered some resistance from our R&D department, particularly when discussing the concept of eliminating waste. They're concerned that we're removing crucial tasks. How can we effectively explain the benefits of eliminating waste, especially to a team that may be hesitant to change?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. What a great question that is. Yeah, what we do is, well, the first thing we do is we don't explain to people how they need to get rid of waste. The first thing we do is pull everybody together in a Kaizen, and we take the process and we put it on the wall in a very low tech. And I say this as a longtime developer, and I'm still a software developer to this day. I believe in technology, guys. I don't think that we should live in the world of Post-it notes. But the first couple of days, we're going to put Post-it notes on the wall. And then we're going to have people identify waste. And we're not going to go ask an R&D person, where do you think R&D waste is? We're going to go put the whole process on the wall and say, R&D, where do you see waste? Product management, where do you see waste? Sales, and so on. And we build consensus, and we build so that people can have empathy with their colleagues and tear down the silos between people. And we don't walk out explaining to others where the waste is. We walk out having done a team effort to identify waste that we're all all ready to work together to eliminate. Then we set ourselves a challenge that we come to consensus on as well. How am I going to measure that I know this waste made a difference? I'm going to make a project 2 months faster. I'm going to release a product, and I'm going to cut my returns by 20% or 80%. But the point is, we have a measurable goal, and then we set about for the next 3 to 6 months, starting to implement and see the effect on that goal. So it's consensus, it's respect for the individual, it's measuring what we're doing, it's identifying waste, and then talking about how we're going to eliminate it, and constantly challenging ourselves that we don't understand things perfectly, that we could be wrong. We don't know, we don't state facts, we state hypotheses. Facts are borne out by data. And so, yeah, it's a cross-functional team from the beginning to the end.
All right, I think that's the last question that we have time for. George, I always learn so much hearing you talk. Great stuff, especially the idea of having a customer on top of the swim lane. I've never seen that in any visual project management anywhere I've ever been. So that's a great piece of feedback there.
Yeah,
So
I was just
Go
gonna say,
ahead.
I'm glad you feel that way. That was the single reason. That was that's the single most reason a project would get turned down in an early planning phase. That was the number one reason the customer lane was so bad. I know you got to finish up, but I thought I'd throw that in.
So I encourage all of you to connect with George on LinkedIn, George Ellis. Follow his weekly newsletter, The Innovation Corner. He puts out an amazing newsletter there, lots of great stuff. And watch all of his webinars too. So he does a ton of different topics here, so you can learn a lot. So thank you all for participating today. As I mentioned earlier, this recording will be made available to you in about 1 to 2 days. You'll get an email from us. Please check your spam folder in case you do not receive it. And thank you all for participating. And we hope to see you again here on another webinar from Lean Focus. Thanks and have a great rest of your week. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.